So our next speaker is Thomas Vander Wal, and this is going to be a very impromptu little background on Thomas. Thomas has been doing web, IA, everything digital related since about the mid-90s. He has coined the term phothonomy, and he is also very good friends with Steve Portugal here in the room, as well as Christina Woodkey, our keynote speaker. And together they have helped co-found the IA Institute, as well as boxesandarrows.com. So without further ado, we will introduce Thomas, and he will be talking about setting structure for social comfort.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here today and a pleasure to be alive. If you're happy to be alive, raise your hand. Woo! Yeah. All righty. So starting off, I'm going to give you a little bit about me. There we go. So I've been doing this digital stuff for an awful long time. I tend to focus an awful lot in recent years on enterprise and social. I started doing social and tools for enterprise in '96. I was working at a trade association with 3,000 attorneys spread across the United States, and I ran their professional closed CompuServe forum. And you learn one heck of a lot about how people interact, how nasty people can be, how petty people can be by working with 3,000 attorneys that don't necessarily agree. I went to public policy school at Georgetown and graduate school and learned an incredible amount of what I learned there on how to see people, how to see models, how to see things flow out, how do you incorporate change. I was using that to figure out the social stuff. And so I've been doing it an awful long time, and the social stuff that happened on the web, beginning with sort of Web 2.0 and in sort of the mid-2000s, that's a very light version, and it gets very complicated. So today's talk is looking at the complicated piece and very much taking that apart and making it a little bit more simple. An awful lot of what I do, I frame as a gap seer and gap solver. And being able to see the complexity in things and breaking apart the complexity to what I call small lenses, and being able to hold up simple small lenses that you can see things, see the complexity in simple single pieces, and as they fold over each other, you see something different. Sometimes it won't be clear, sometimes it won't. I've published a book with Dave Gray called Connected Company. And the foundation for that book is my social lenses, which at the time was about 40-some. There's now about 50-some. They get far beyond just social. And there's about 2 or 3 social lenses that are key in today's talk, and looking at social comfort and the structure of social comfort. So I'm going to start with a story that's non-digital. It's in that sort of physical world. I lived in a world that wasn't digital. When I got out of college, I was playing around with, I had a computer in college. In the 80s, it was somewhat rare. But I got out and I worked at the it changed directions. So back is forward and forward is back. We're in that world. So I worked at the Commonwealth Club, which is like the National Press Club, but it's the San Francisco version. 300 to 400 talks a year. There's one on Friday. That's broadcast around the world on public radio and military services radio. And my job there, straight out of college, was membership acquisition, working with development, which means raising money. But another thing that I did is I worked with 2 different committees. So the Commonwealth Club board and the committee members are the movers and shakers. They were the CEOs, the senior VPs of Chevron, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, all the big companies. So you're sitting with these powerful people in a room, 8 to 12 of them. And there was something that was really interesting that would happen in this room, because they were all movers and shakers. They all had their company secrets, and they all got along really well until you added a new person to the room. Somebody would leave, somebody would move, and you'd add a new member to the committee. The next 2 months, each committee met once a month. The committee didn't work. Nothing was really shared. All the little chit-chat between things didn't really happen. People didn't know who this person was. There was an unease with them, and people would, it happened the first month that I was in the room until I had lunch with most of them one-on-one. And then they were fine. They're like, oh, he's not going to share secrets. He's not going to take it back and tell stories out of school. It was essentially Chatham House rules. And so it was a very interesting thing to watch this happen. And about midway through my 2 years there, when I was working, a new president came in and said, okay, on the committees, before any new member comes in, they have to meet with every single one of the people on the committee for lunch, one-on-one. And that created this comfort. And that happens an awful lot online as well. And these worlds that we're creating, these worlds that we're living in, that's very much what we're dealing with. So we take this digital world and we start bringing it into this physical world, and we have to start figuring out, what do we need to do in the digital world? So what we're needing to do is essentially take that understanding in social software and think about it for mainstream adoption. And the best way to do that, whoa, no, I'm going the wrong way. I'm really off. Back is front and front is back sometimes.
I think your remote is just, you're holding it upside down.
Right. So forget everything you've seen. Nothing has happened. These are not the slides you're looking for. So what we need to do is take the understanding for social software and think about it for mainstream adoption. And a lot of the social software that we're using online, the commercial, and sort of this commercial web, the open web, really doesn't work well when you have to think about it for everybody. And when you think about it for enterprise, and you think about it for a company, it's every single person that has to be in it. Every person uses email. There's a huge, giant difference. The social design that happens out on the web doesn't work when every single person needs to use it. It gets really complex. And so this talk is about sort of breaking that open. How do we get that? How do we get to that point? How do we take that social web stuff and make it even better? So one of the things with social software inside the company, people are reticent to share because they don't want to be the company idiot. In 2005, when I first went out on my own, was working with, there was a startup in Silicon Valley that said, hey, we see that you're going to be coming. Can you swing by and talk to us for about 2 or 3 hours? They no longer exist, and I cannot remember what the name of this company was, but they had a small space in what's now sort of the Symantec campus. And I knew that because when I went to go do a project with Symantec, I'm like, this looks really familiar. I've been in that cafeteria. And in that cafeteria was this little project of walking up to people randomly that were going to get coffee and saying, hey, do you guys know you have a wiki? Do you use it? Have you found it? Have you edited it? And everybody's, oh, yeah. Edited it? Add something new? No, I don't want to be the company idiot. And I'm like, I asked 6 people. 4 of them said approximately the same thing, if not exactly, I don't want to be the company idiot. My job is on the line. No way am I going to touch that thing. They'll email things, and the others hadn't touched it as well. None of the 6 had touched it. So I'm like, okay, we need to figure out how to make this a little bit easier for humans. So the way that we do that is taking a step back from the digital space back to the human space. And we need to look at the human social interactions. And the human social interactions of how we do things. When we meet somebody, we walk up, we have these ways of doing things. Essentially, we have social scripts. How do we work in a group together? We meet someone for the first time. Oh, what's your name? What do you do? Where are you from? Oh, I'm from so-and-so. And we start playing this game in the Western culture of, oh, you're from Palo Alto. Do you know so-and-so? Where do you live? And you start doing this triangulation to see if you can figure it out. And it's these social scripts to figure out, where's my bond with this person? Where's my connection? Do they know someone that I know? Do I have comfort with them? Can I figure this out? And a lot of our social tools, and particularly in enterprise, that piece is really missing in getting to know people, and I'll get into that a lot more. So one of the things that we really have to do with this and sort of looking at these human scripts and taking these human scripts for how we do things in different cultures and bringing those different cultures and bringing those different ways of introducing each other, interacting with each other, we need to be able to do that in a digital manner and make this much more familiar. Essentially, what we need to do is rethink how the tools map to our human needs and how we do things. That's about the only way forward. So next, I'm going to get into sort of this big thing that everybody is caught up on, and it's the wrong thing, which is, what is trust? Trust is a very powerful world. Everybody is like talking about trust. 2008, I finally got fed up. And because I couldn't design, I couldn't develop solutions around this trust problem. And I tend to work with an awful lot of C-level folks, an awful lot of upper-level management. And they're like, oh, well, our company needs to trust this, our people need to trust this. And trust has 7 different definitions. And so I ask them which definition they're using, and they give me a definition, and I'm like, oh. And they change it in 2 or 3 sentences. And they move through 3 or 4 of them fluidly. You cannot ask a user to talk about trust and give you an answer. And so in 2008, I banned the word trust. We are no longer using the word trust. It cannot be uttered. You have to use a proxy term, another term, tell me what you're really thinking. So once I started saying, stop using this trust word, there was a whole lot of other words that started coming up. And when I started getting to these other words, one of them that came up was respect. Do I respect this person? Are they dependable? Are they valued? Or people saying, yeah, this person's valued. This was a signifier of trust. Are they honest? What is meant by honest sometimes is a little bit fluid. Are they treasured? And that would seem to be a really valuable concept, but it was difficult to design from. Are they loved? And they have a strong bond. Oh, we can't lose this person. They're loved by everybody. They're sort of the connector. Are they believable? Are they consistent? And consistency is something that's really valuable. But the one that kept on coming up an awful lot was comfort. I'm comfortable with this person. I'm comfortable with this tool. And so I started asking questions around this comfort. And comfort was incredibly valuable. And so I started framing it as social comfort. And the social comfort, I would say, are you comfortable with doing this, using this tool as we've walked through it? And they're like, no, I'm not really comfortable. I would never share. What makes you uncomfortable? What are the things that would bring you to comfort? They can tell you exactly what it is. Trust is nebulous. It's off in the ether. You will never get anywhere talking about trust. Trust is a powerful word. You will get places in a boardroom saying, people trust this. You will never get a good product talking about trust and talking to users about trust. So being able to do this, and once I had sort of stumbled across this trust, and it was very quickly in 2008, I started breaking it down into 3 different levels. And the 3 different components of social comfort are people. People need to have social comfort with one another. They need to have social comfort with the tools. They also need to have social comfort with content, being able to share content, and being able to interact with the content in the system. And that becomes incredibly important. So I'm going to start off looking at social comfort with people. And social comfort with people is something that takes a little bit of unpacking, and it's sort of using a frame looking forward, sort of a model to be able to say, okay, when people have comfort and they're using the system really well, this is how it works. And so the elements of social software are one of the ways that I do this. And it breaks down into a system. So this is somebody who is comfortable using a system. The system has identity. They have an identity in the system. They're logged into it. They also have an object. They have an interest in a conversation. They're pointing to something, an article, a photo, a presentation, and saying, oh, this is of interest. So the first thing they do is make sure that they're logged in. They have their account. They're checked in. The next thing that they do is they want to take an action around that object. They want to say, hey, this is something really interesting. I want to bookmark this. I want to write a short blog post. I want to do something. Maybe even just push it out onto Instagram or an internal network or externally. But there's an action that takes place. The next thing that happens is sharing. And it's being able to hit the button and say, oh, I want to share this. And having these 2 in this order is rare, or was really rare. It's getting a lot better. If you have them in the other way in most social software systems, you set the sharing level, so you log into something, and that starts limiting what you're thinking. So the action that you want to take, you start limiting what you want to put in there, because, oh, this is sharing with the whole company, or this is sharing with this group. The limitations and the reach of that sharing changes how or what people are going to share. They're not capturing all of their thoughts. They're not taking the fuzzy and the ephemeral and putting into the digital to make it found by others and refound. So getting this in the correct order of taking an action, doing a brain dump, annotating something, and then saying, oh, I want to share the whole thing. Oh, I just want to share the first paragraph or this first sentence. The other I may hold to a private group or just hold on for my own notes, but take what I have and share it out. There's one tool that I know of that does this really well and have done it for a long time, which is Traction Software, and they're out of Rhode Island, and they developed it for Defense Department and the intelligence community. And one of the things that they needed is you would have a top-level person asking a low-level person, hey, can you give me a full dump on this? And all the middle management between them couldn't see it. But what the middle management could see was the title of something and maybe the abstract. They couldn't see all the details. They couldn't see the 40 pages. And then little by little, they would open up paragraphs. And so the tool needed to be able to do that. And it's phenomenal the way that it works and just sort of the ease. And it works in this model really well. But once you have shared something, the next thing that happens is there's a sort of quick reputation. Somebody will see it and go, ah, this is good. And it's very, very hair trigger. This is good, this is valuable to me, I don't care about this. But if it's something valuable, someone might want to set sort of a light relationship and say, hey, we should talk about this. I want to follow this person, I want to hold on to this person around this subject. This is somebody who's of interest. The next thing that happens is you start having a conversation and saying, oh, did you see this other thing? Here's this thing, what about this other thing? And you start realizing it's more than just one person, it's a group. You now have a group discussing this stuff. Sometimes it can have a boundary, and so they're talking about, let's say, World IA Day. And it's like, hey, maybe we really need to do something. And it goes from a group to a collaboration, to getting something done, taking the conversations, taking what the group is doing and saying, oh, we're going to go from sort of a collective exercise and people working together. We need to now take all of our different ideas, meld them into one so we can have one product, one thing that comes out of this. So we've done this traditionally. And we've taken this build order in a very specific order and what works really well for people who are comfortable. And traditionally, we had this line through the relationship. And so traditional tools before the mid-2000s, you had a manager that said, the 16 of you are going to be in a new group, get to know each other, and here's a little bio, here's a little background, do some bonding exercises, go. The digital world, that line isn't there, and we're left wondering who these people are. And social software tools are not necessarily great at doing this. They're not necessarily great at figuring out, who's this person? Why am I talking to them? Why do I care about them? And so it's what the manager had done in traditional groupware now needs to be done by the tools, and it's getting better. The thing that was really poor was the profiles, and the profiles just needed an incredible amount of work. And one of the things that we also run into is sort of false knowing people, which I frame as the paradox of familiarity. And we're familiar with people through working together. And it's like, oh, we sort of understand who people are, and we have a social comfort with these people because we have worked with them. There's also familiarity through reputation. I haven't met this person, but I've heard great things about them. I've read some of the things that they posted. And so there's this understanding of who somebody is. There's also hallway familiarity. That person that you run across at 10:15 every morning, you're going to get coffee, they're coming back with their coffee. Hey, how's it going? No idea what their name is, and all of a sudden, after 2 years of 10:15 in the morning, of 200 days a year, you're sitting across the table. Hey, we're working on a project together. You're the coffee guy. And it's just like, oh, you're really familiar. Hey, how's your coffee? And that's all you really have. And then there's online familiarity, where it's like, oh yeah, I follow your Instagram account. And there's like these others that sometimes there's depth online, and then sometimes there's just not. But there's sort of this sort of familiarity which can, sometimes give it a little bit of comfort, but it also drives a majority of the population really crazy because they don't really know who these people are. Am I going to share, my plan for the next project, or, the things that I'm working on for, to move my career ahead? What am I going to share with them? How am I going to do this? So we start getting to being able to build comfort, and what is the comfort that really makes people have the walls come down and start sharing with others. And the first one is similar interests. This is one of the things that goes back to the 90s and having started discussion groups. The most popular places on Facebook right now are closed forums and closed groups and interest areas. It's one of the top things within LinkedIn right now is groups where people are discussing things. The level of discussion may not be all that deep, but it's like, oh, you know this person because of similar interests. And that's showing up in an awful lot of other services and sort of building a social comfort. What are the first thing, then that social script that we do, what are you interested in, where you live, this triangulation game. In Western culture, that's what we do. And social tools are beginning to do that rather well these days. Also, there's similar life stories. Being able to say, oh, I moved when I was a kid, I moved around an awful lot. Oh, you're a military brat. Oh, yeah, I was too. Or, I was an IBM brat. You hear that an awful lot, and the parents are moving around a ton. And so it's these similar life stories that are bringing people together, as well as similar experiences. Just different places that you've worked, or you like cooking, you went to the same, you like going to, cooking lessons around the globe, being able to do all these different things. What are these similar experiences that you have? Maybe you like jumping off of cliffs, sometimes with a parachute, sometimes not. And you find others with that similar sort of interest, and they like that thrill. And so being able to find these similar experiences and building these common bonds is really valuable. And the last is finding people in common. One of the easiest ways to get comfort with somebody is like, oh, I know Susan as well. And it's like, yeah, that makes it really easy. And they're like, oh, can you tell me? And yesterday I was having discussion about a potential project. And they're like, oh, do you know so-and-so? I'm like, crud, I've known her for years. Oh, go talk to her. I'm like, oh. She was like my next, I saw that she just popped on Skype. I'm like, okay, I'm hitting her next. And she's like, oh yeah, really good place, got a really good background. And it like starts filling in the gaps. They know you, know what your interests, know what you're worried about, other things. It becomes really easy to grease things. And so being able to find these common bonds is incredibly valuable. And I didn't really understand how incredibly valuable it was until I ran across Ben Brown talking about his product Consummating at South by Southwest. We were on a panel together talking about tagging. And Consummating was this Web 2.0 tagging dating service where you put your profile up and you tag yourself. Nothing more than that, no other bio, nothing else. And so people would just tag themselves. And if somebody dated them, they would tag them as well. And the person who had been tagged could just say, no, I don't really want that. But someone could put in a filter and say, I'm looking for librarian, glasses, ponytail, quiet, books, movies. And they would build a bond, and you would get a list of people who sort of met those criteria or not. But what Ben Brown started talking about was this quirkiness factor. And so the panel was moderated by this guy, Heath Rowe, who had been working in building community development for Fast Company, and that's how I knew him from the 90s. And Ben was talking about this quirkiness factor that they found, which was they started looking at what are the things that led to long-term relationships and even marriages through this thing consummating where people were meeting through just tagging themselves, nothing deeper than that. And one of the things that they found was they had 100,000 people or so. There was this rough number of rare occurrence greater than 2, and at this point it was less than 40 with 100,000 people. And so it was this rare occurrence of a small number of people who had rare connections, 2 tags together that were really rare. And so he was saying, for instance, if you have 30 tags that you've put about yourself, but one of them is you're a Manhattanite and you're very proud of that, and the other is you're a mountain climber, what are the odds? And people who find these 2 things that they cannot find in anybody else, all of a sudden there's this deep bond. And as he was talking, he's like, yeah. He's like, Heath, do you have anything to say? And he's like, I'm the Manhattanite mountain climber, and my wife is the Manhattanite mountain climber. I don't know why that's choking me up. But it was just like this common bond and just like these rare things. I'm like, they're like, I've never met anybody else in Manhattan. I've lived here for 12 years. I've never met anybody else who's a mountain climber. I love mountain climbing. I'm always going by myself. And just having these rare things and bringing people together starts building really strong bonds. And so being able to identify those things, what are the common bonds between people, becomes really valuable. But there's a cautionary tale as well with everything, because social can be a little bit creepy. And one of the things we need to watch out for is, while finding common bond that is private and rare occurrence between people can lead to really strong bonds, often people don't want to have this public. And sort of the things that really drive us together, and I'll get into this with a third piece and looking at content and sharing content, but it's like getting people to share things that are really private builds incredibly strong bonds, and being able to have those bonds and get to that point where you have that quirkiness is incredibly valuable. And I've talked to an awful lot of large organizations who, when they put social networks in place, they're like, the best thing that we have are our 6 people in our 200,000 person firm that are spread all around the globe, and they have 6 people who they've connected with that have the same passion. And they will not leave this organization because they don't want to lose those 5 other people. And they're like, we don't know any place else in the world that has this. This is our passion. This is our life. This is our work. This is what we're holding on to. And so it became, it's a strong bond not only with the community, with the people, but also with the organization or the network that they're in. So one of the things that's primary is be able to think about privacy, particularly from an IA perspective. What's the interface? What do we share? How do we structure the information? Be able to let people see what is public, or see what is shared. Being able to have that view. What can other people see? What can other people can see who are public? What do people who can see my friends? What do families see? Being able to have that view is incredibly important in all of this. Also allow for progressive disclosure. Being able to say, if somebody's a cancer survivor, I know an awful lot of organizations who have cancer survivors, and they have a really tight-knit community inside their social platform. And so being able to have progressive disclosure, they don't want to share it with everybody, but when they connect with another person, and they're like, oh, hey, I'm looking at their profile, and once they connect, they say, oh, cancer survivor, that's a really strong bond. They have a strong connection. That is gold between them. And then the last is allow for an ask, and be able to say, oh, relationship status is one of those like goofy ones that you're really not supposed to ask about. And yesterday on Facebook, some of my old team members were talking about odd experiences and going for interviews. And one of the guys who was interviewing to join my team, I had met at a party about 2 months prior, and he was dating a friend of mine. And I had my team interview him, and I didn't make the connection with the resume and who he was until I saw him. I'm like, oh, hey, how's so-and-so? He's like, oh, we broke up. And he's like, wait a minute, And it was like all these things unfolding. He's like, that was really awkward. I'm like, sorry about that. If there'd been Facebook, it would have been a completely other really awkward situation, but I would have known that you guys had broken up. But it was just like, I knew him. I'd hung out with him for like 3 hours talking about stuff and had a great time, at a friend's party. And it was just like, okay. And so just, that relationship question is like, don't really go there, but allow for an ask. And they're like, hey, what's going on? We need to work weekends. Is that fine? There's all sorts of way around things. And sometimes as colleagues, you're just like, I don't want to overstep any bounds, but how do you do that digitally where we somewhat maybe know how to do that in the physical world and do it in a non-creepy way, but online, how do you do that in a non-creepy way? So allow for an ask. Facebook is now doing this really well. Facebook is finally doing quite a few things really well that they really did not do really well for a long time. Also, be aware of the really sensitive areas, which are health, relationship status, personal matters. Being able to say, I need to be gone for 2 weeks. I can't say why, but just being able to understand that personal matters in digital space may not have a place in the workplace. And some teams and some groups are really tight, others are not, and just understand that this is a sensitive area. Mental health. And lastly, finances. And quite often organizations will have a group for people to deal with mortgages, financial troubles, other things. But also that is something that you may not want to put on the front of their profile. Hey, a member of the about to be go through foreclosure, when you're looking at their company profile. So just understand sort of what those really difficult areas are. And so essentially, as we're setting up the structure for people and within systems, there's three things that we really need to be focusing on. And it's being able to know what can be openly shared, going through all the categories, all the possible questions in profiles and saying, what can be openly shared? Name, yeah, right. But in public, sometimes name isn't there. There's a really good video interview with Howard Alexander interviewing Chris Poole, who is Moot, one of the founders or the founder of 4chan, talking about anonymized names and the value of them. And it's anonymized names. It's one of the things that women tend to do online an awful lot is not use their real name. They'll use an anonymized name, and just the value of that and having that name follow you and knowing who somebody is and always using that anonymized name in a service essentially works as a proxy for a real name. And so being able to walk through those, it's like a 10-minute video. I did a transcription of it just because it needed to search it and I wanted to come back to it. But look it up. Look for Chris Poole. He's talking, I think, Alexander's role was with GigaOM. But the next is also knowing what to share if connected and there is a match. And being able to say, oh, the two of you are cancer survivors if you're connected. Here are things that you will see, maybe not others see. And then being able to also set aside ask to share. This could be relationship status, all sorts of other things. And so just being able to walk through those, know the culture and cultures of your organization or the tools that you're building for the outside world becomes incredibly important. And this is probably one of the most valuable things that you can do is to walk through this. And so just what we start getting to is essentially this transparency and knowing people through their profiles and having some transparency, being able to see activities that people have had within a network, what they have shared, what they have not shared. Quite often when somebody looks to connect, they'll look at the profile and they're like, what if they share it out? What's there? Let me see the value of what they've done. Oh, they're just sharing cat pictures. Okay, I know that person. They may have kite stuff, or it could be they're sharing white papers, other things, and cat pictures. Okay, yeah, okay, maybe interested. It all depends on just sort of what the value is, but know that they're looking at more than just the profile, but the profile needs to be the really key piece. So looking at profiles, build profiles from the viewer's perspective. This is rare, really rare. What you want to do is the person who is looking at that profile be able to highlight what they have in common, because they're looking at a wall of words and being able to have something cancer survivor stand out and like, that's a common bond. Or worked on this project, showing the people that they have in common that are their connections. And so being able to capture sort of the breadth of possible social connections, be able to give contextual disclosure, and being able to say, oh, you two are connected, or you're looking at this and you have the same things in common, being able to highlight that. And then relevance of the semi-private disclosure is also really important. So I'm going to quickly talk about what are the things that sort of erode comfort, particularly between people. And often you'll have a person in an organization who is sort of the mentor or the leader. I was working with a group, and it was mostly people who were advising the people who were running the communities, and it was for people who had families with people coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And just the things that they would go through, and they're like, my husband or wife has just come back. They're not talking to me. They just have days where they sit in a cold, dark room. Is this normal? And just being able to do that stuff. And knowing who is the person who is not one of them, but who is sort of the community advisor and just sort of in there as a helper, being able to label them is really helpful. Because if that gets out and they're like, oh, we thought you were one of us, that will kill the group immediately. So be really clear on just sort of what the roles are if you're not one of them, or if you're in there for somebody else. Quite often in dating services, I have an awful lot of married friends who use dating services not for dating, but because they're really good quite often at understanding social interaction design, what's being used, and they're always saying, oh, go look at this, go look at that, for how people connect, what are the things that matter, see how things are going on, and they'll put on their profile, just here to help or just here to watch, not here to date. And so people aren't freaked out by things. And so just being able to understand that sort of role exists becomes incredibly helpful. Next, we'll look at tools. And so one of the things that's really helpful is having a closed garden. One of the things in Facebook is those closed groups are incredibly popular. But when things are a little bit more open, people tend not to share as much. In the mid-2000s was running across organizations who had SharePoint, and SharePoint's default is to lock all the groups down. Nobody can share. You can't search it, you can't find it. It's essentially, you have gone from a 3-silo company to a 600-silo company in months, but nobody is benefiting from that because the knowledge isn't really shared. And so they're like, oh, we want to push everything and make it public. And we're just going to unlock everything and put an open platform. And they went from 40% adoption in 6 months to single digits in 6 months with a new platform. And it's like there is another way. And so being able to get through that sort of SharePoint default and being able to get that comfort of open sharing, what you essentially end up with is a comfortable spaces with permeable walls. There's a great urban planner, researcher, Douglas Appleyard from Berkeley, who was looking at safety of streets in the 70s. And one of the things he talked about was just sort of having a setback from the street. People felt that their neighborhoods were safe if there was a little bit of setback, if they had a porch, even more. And open spaces and how houses are built, they have the public welcoming space and then the private rooms farther in the back usually, farther away from the door. So taking that sort of idea and bringing it into digital services, you have your private work that happens sort of in the back, but you want to be able to share in your front window or out on your porch what you're working on and what you're proud of. And most social tools do not have that. And from about 2007, I've been focusing on this comfortable spaces with permeable walls. Again, Traction is one of the few that has done this. There's some other tools now that now allow for this. If you're looking at a platform that the only way to take information from a closed space and make it public or share it with a wider group is to copy and paste it, you've got the wrong tool. You need to be able to say and be able to have buy-in from the people who have put that information out there to say, yeah, I'm comfortable sharing this with the next level out. So being able to walk through these things and going from these comfortable spaces where people will do a complete brain dump and share things and then move them on. One of the other gotchas and tools is the social reticence of a click, because people don't understand what various clicks are. So one of the things that they ask is how broadly are my things shared? By doing this, does this go out to everybody? What's the reach of this? What do others think this means? And so with culture, and many different cultures and organizations and out in the world, you have completely different meanings for what everything is. The fave in Twitter or a fave or a star in something can mean many different things. And I'll get at that into more detail. A like can mean many different things. And what it is labeled and what it says officially in the site, people ignore that, and their small groups are the ones that say, oh, it means this, and we need to follow up on this. And so there's cultural norms that are followed that have nothing to do with what it says or other pieces. What do the features and function of the tools and service actually do? Trying to figure out, you like something in Facebook because you want to come back and find it again, used to be pretty much good luck. There's now a page, good luck finding it, but there is a page that has all of your likes and you can go and scroll through it. You can try and bookmark it, but the URL changes, so good luck. But in working through this, one of the things that I was doing, and organizations were continually stumped by this, and in giving talks about this, I had somebody come up afterward and they're like, we had somebody fired because of a misunderstanding. So it's like when they clicked the fave, somebody had thought that it was a sign-off. It was an approval, and it was a senior level director. They were looking to do a major cultural company change and get into Latin America. And somebody said, hey, the social media stuff happens a lot faster. Rather than taking 6 months to 9 months, we can, if the directors sign off and click the fave, we're good to go. Authority, signed off. One of the guys didn't get that message. He thought the fave was, hey, this is a place to bookmark something. I can come back to it later. I'm swamped for 4 weeks. And so 4 weeks after it went, he's like, gave the 16 point memo and outline for going into Latin America, a good review. Said, these 2 points, if we go and do this, we will be booted out within 4 months. These are just no-goes. You would never want to do this. And he raised it to the senior VP, and he's like, oh, crud. Went to the CEO, and they're like, we just reallocated dollars, millions of dollars, because we thought this guy signed off on it. So someone got to get a little funcation. And then I told roughly that story at the next large event and had about 1,000 people in the room, and somebody else came up out of that room. Oh, we had the same thing. Slightly different context. And just because people don't know what the click is. So the click can be many different things. So when we click on it, being able to understand the intent, it could be that somebody's wanting to hold on to it. I want to do that, for clarity. Being able to say, oh, I have interest in this. I approve of this. And then, oh, I'm also giving kudos. And so what we have, and one of the things I started working with, is that there's 7 different intents that people have. We're trying to favorite and see what our favorites are over time. We're favoriting to share with others. There's also a favorite to show you approve of something and saying, hey, this looks really good. They are trying to sign off on and say, yeah, go ahead. And also use as a bookmark to come back to, which has nothing to do with like or dislike. It's like, I don't have time for this. It looks interesting. I need to hold on to this, form an opinion, come back to it. Give kudos to the creator. Quite often people are like, hey, they'll favorite something, give a like, because they're just saying, hey, good job. Also, a hook to trigger other services with IFTTT, or if you use Twitter and Instapaper. Instapaper can go out and grab your Twitter faves and pull it into Instapaper for later reading. Pinboard will also go out and grab your Twitter favorites and expand the full thing, archive it, fully text searchable, have it in there, makes it easy to come back to. So it's just a hook for other tools and aggregation piece. Has nothing to do with like or sharing with others. And lastly, it can be an acknowledgement that you've seen something and just saying, yeah, I'm not going to respond anymore. This is end of conversation. And someone's like, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see this? I faved it. We're good. And so just being able to have this understanding, and so that we get out of misunderstanding, but there's no really good, easy way to do this. I'm going to do a quick run through of the social progressions as the last piece within tools. And so the social progressions are sort of one of the lenses that I use to help frame the different pieces and the different types of social patterns we have in tools. And we essentially have a personal space, and we're sharing something to hold on to for ourselves, being able to see where we left off to move forward. We're sharing ideas and sparks, so things like Twitter, really short, just quick sparks, throwing stuff out there. Being able to have gather information, gathering others with interest, and to have a campfire to share ideas, go more deeply. Broader interest sharing, being able to say, hey, we have an idea, let's take it to the whole organization, becomes a bonfire. And lastly, we need to make this into a product, and that becomes a torch. So the spark, essentially the Twitter pieces, but one of the things, like with small pieces of content, people are like, we're seeing a pattern, we want more of this. Being able to say, can we get these 5 people that had these tweets, these series of tweets? We want to be able to take them and move them into a campfire to get more information, get them talking about it a little bit more. And being able to get the small comfortable space, and being able to say, is there something here, is there not something here? Jive software, I had talked about this in workshops and in public presentations for about 2 years. And CEO of Jive said, hey, can you, and 2 other large social platforms or enterprise are like, could you please write this up? Because we want our customers asking for this because we want to build it. But we need to have it framed. And Jive now has it. And 30% of Jive interactions are happening in campfires. A lot of them are just sort of deleted after, or just sort of left. There's no moving forward. But they just want to capture the idea, see what's going on. But the next thing, once you have an idea that's good, share it out with the rest of the organization. Be able to get legal, be able to get logistics, everybody else giving feedback. And lastly, be able to turn that and take real collaboration to get down to one final piece. You have got 6 different ways to do things, get them down to one final way with a torch and holding off to the decision points. And so finally, the last thing that we need to talk about is social comfort with content. And social comfort with content is essentially trying to figure out how to get 100% of what's in somebody's head out and shareable. So you're trying to smack the orange, break it into the pieces to get it shared around. So the paradox, and it starts coming back to things we went over before, are that it often takes sharing with those that we're most comfortable with to get the ideas out of our head. And so having that small, comfortable space, sometimes really comfortable space. You may have somebody who's not comfortable with an idea, but really needs to share it and wants to get it out there, putting it out to 30,000 person organization, or even a 20 person organization, but they may want to share it with 2 people first to get it vetted, and they're like, ooh, don't use these 2 terms. That's going to cause the CEO to go crazy. But knowing what those things are really helpful. And then sharing content, and they're trying to do it with people who are like me, being able to understand, being able to understand the triggers that will erode fear and social comfort for others. And then the more personal the issue, the more difficult it is to get social comfort around that content. And one of the things that is really important is understanding why people will not share. And sometimes it's external empathy. And they don't want to share because they're afraid that it might hurt others. They may not want to rock the boat. And lastly, they're worried about sort of whistleblowing concerns and working in a small group that can sort of walk people through this and say, yeah, this is how to frame this idea so that you're not hurting others, or yeah, maybe this is a whistleblowing thing, maybe we need to do something. But getting these ideas out of people's heads is really important. But taking all of these things in common across the social comfort and thinking about the people, the tools, and then the content to be able to have an organization and or a public social tool that people are really sharing things and making value and really helping others, and they're happy to do it. And people are really happy for everything that's being contributed and being involved in it. So that's how we get social comfort as a whole, and I want to thank you very much. Questions? Yep.
Thank you. One thing I didn't hear that I was wondering about how it might figure into what you were talking is the fear of failure, and that failure is an option, that it's okay. So how would you put that into your system?
So that's where the comfortable walls, the comfortable spaces is really important, because people are more comfortable to have a fear of failing with people who they're familiar with, to put ideas out there, crazy ideas. They may not do it to a whole organization, and quite often, having other people say, yeah, that's a crazy idea, but yeah, let's float it. And sometimes they'll float it anonymously, and it may come out of a group. So the group might put it forward and put it out on their front porch and say, hey, we've got this idea. What do we think about this? And then being able to hold on and track the person who actually put it out there, so that they get credit. And being able to get that right so that they get credit, but they're not seen as a failure and removed from the company. And it's one of the big things is sort of going through culture change and going through change management, and getting the organization ready. And one of the big questions I have in kickoff meetings is what happens when something goes wrong. And there's an organization here in the DC area where it was really funny, because they're like, oh, it's fine as long as you're not saying something about the CEO. And the whole room goes, oh, yeah. And so there's been people who had been fired immediately for questioning, just saying, hey, is this really, maybe we should take this other tack. And it was something a CEO's mandated way forward, and they were gone. Desk was cleared in an hour. And that happened quite a few times, and they're like, oh yeah. And like, as long as it's not with the CEO, and so it's having that CEO sort of filter. It's like, in the tool. So it's like, but it's just sometimes organizations that have former military, how they deal with problems, that's a good question to ask. And then other times you'll watch and like, oh, everything's fine. We're a learning organization. And then sit with them for a whole day and they're like, oh, something wrong happens. They're like, oh, I've got to fire that whole team. They're useless. I'm like, really? How's the granola? And so it's interesting just sort of watching and sort of understanding that it's subcultures within the organization. The whole company believes that it has one culture, but there is no one culture. Like there's no one culture around the globe. And it's understanding these subcultures and subcultures and figuring out how to blend them together. So it's getting to that being willing to fail. And as a consultant and being outside, it's much easier to go in and fail and throw things out. And because our role is to go away. I don't like that line anymore because sometimes I go away a little bit more sooner than I would like. But it's just, that's what we do. And we're in there to put out ideas, and we have to be fine with they may not take our ideas, may not use them. They may find great value, and they may find the golden nugget by our not being right. And it may get them to another point, and that's good too.
You're speaking a lot about like soft skills like transparency and empathy. Oh, sorry. You're speaking a lot about soft skills like transparency and empathy. How do you communicate that to these C-level kind of like military-minded people who obviously, as you just shared, don't really believe in that or see the value in that work?
That's an awful lot of where I get brought in is that C-level, and little by little they're realizing that their IT department has not had the employees nor their customers' interest in mind. They're putting tools out there that are easiest for IT to manage. And so they want us, the goal of the C-level is to have 100% adoption. And have as many people and their customers using it as well. And sort of the framing it of, if you don't do these things, your adoption rate is going to be low and your engagement rate is going to be low. What you want to do is to have people engaging, feeling comfortable, embracing this stuff, and hopefully the organization is going to use it in a good way. If you're talking to the NSA, there's a whole lot of other questions that you may have to ask or consider. But just capturing the information, what are they going to do with it? But getting that information and having people talk and embrace and use things. An awful lot of organizations are trying to kick email out of their organizations as fast as possible. They're like, our company is really smart, but we're throwing it into the cemetery as fast as we can by putting it in email. And they're like, we need to hold on to this knowledge and hold on to this information because our people are really bright. We hire great people, but email is where it goes to die. And so they're like, we need to get a platform that does that, but everybody uses email, and they think everybody's going to start using these tools immediately. And so walking them through reality of, it may take a little while, here are the steps, but also the only way to get people using the stuff is to embrace the soft skills. We're all fleshy. Yep.
Hi. So I really appreciate how you kind of illustrated how we can find people that we're familiar with, and I think there are a lot of places that are doing a really good job of that right now. Yeah. However, if I had to spend the whole day with a clone of myself, I would probably go crazy.
Yes.
So my question for you is, what do you think the opportunity is for some of these technologies to help find people who are complementary to you in order to build on that?
There's some... have worked with companies that have algorithms that find people with adjacency and people who are good complements to you. And being able to look at projects and understand sort of what skills work on projects or what people meld well together, and they have good results. And so taking characteristics that people have, and it's like, oh, this person reads this, and using things that they have in common, and then also differences to get a much broader set. When I used to build teams, I had spreadsheets, kept track of all the different skills that were needed across all the different projects. Each person had a 1 to 5 rating of their depth, and I would build teams of like, okay, I need this, and I also had another number which was where they wanted to be in a year. So they may want to learn JavaScript more. They may want to learn wireframing or prototyping. So I would keep where they wanted to be, and I'm like, oh, this person's a 2, and they want to be a 4 at the end of the year. I need them for their visual design skills, but let me pair them with a 5 on prototyping. And so they were able to build things, but being able to see what people had interest in, and also what was needed for a specific team, and being able to say, oh, I need my numbers to add up like this for a project for these skill sets in order to have that project successful, or this group that's doing an innovation piece. And I'm like, here are the 4 things I need. I need 2 4s, 2 5s on the innovation piece. What does it look like? And when I've been doing consulting, that tool and that spreadsheet has been valuable. I end up like handing that over many times. And they're like, oh yeah, we need to put a group together to think about this new thing. And I'm like, okay, frame all the different pieces that you need to think about, who has those, and figure out who has interest in the other areas. Because if you have an economist who isn't interested in digital engineering, but they need to, it's going to be lost. And so it's like there needs to be comfort and sort of the adjacent comfort levels. That was a good question. And something that is really needed, and I'm hoping some of these folks that are working on algorithms to surface that stuff, hopefully it sees the light of day a little bit soon. Great, thank you very much.